Welcome to an MTD Technical Corner, and we're going to talk a little bit about, well, I don't know about you guys, I've not got a third eye, but we're going to talk about something called 3ETECH, which is third eye tech, and it's all about fine boring. And Wohlhaupter, Emir, Wohlhaupter spent a lot of time in the boring industry from almost 100 years, right?
That is correct. And we do a lot of finishing application at Wohlhaupter, and I think that's also with the breadth of fine boring tools that we have available for every application. We have the right tool to fit everybody's or every needs as far as the diameter that needs to be finished, down to 0.4 as the smallest diameter that we have available with our variable tool, which goes up to the biggest diameter that we can machine off the shelf, up to 3,255 millimeters.
I was smiling there because I knew exactly what you were going to say. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah, and those big boring bars, they are really fun to actually work with. But again, also on those big diameters, the tolerances might a little bit more open. But the part is very expensive, so you don't really want to scrap the part on the last application like finishing always is.
Absolutely, it's probably one of the most important operations you can do, even aside from all the roughing and the finish machining and whatnot. The boring needs to be absolutely right, otherwise the part is not going to go out. And so that's why you need to make sure that you're setting the boring bar correctly. Now, why are boring bars adjustable, and how would you adjust them before you had this kind of digital adjustment?
Boring bars needs to be adjustable because, you know, as smaller your diameter gets, your tolerances are tighter. So you cannot just use a regular presetter to get your cutting edges to the right diameter, because you're always going to have a difference between the presetter and the machine that you're going to later machine on. So you need a kind of adjustability when you're making your first test cut. And from the test cut, you would adjust it to the final diameter you need.
And how normally would you adjust a boring bar? What would you be reading off?
Yeah, usually, or the majority of nowadays tools, they have a vernier dial where you have hash marks on it. From a mark to mark is about 10 microns. And then on the vernier, you can set it down to 2 microns. But it's always a little bit more difficult to read, especially in machining environments where lighting maybe is not as good. So it gets a little bit like guessing, especially if you want to adjust microns.
Absolutely. You can imagine these boring bars are normally in situ. They'll be in the machine tool. It might be horizontal, might be vertical. You've got to sit there, you're getting dripped on in coolant. You're there twisting the little vernier, trying to read this tiny little scale. You can see it's quite small. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's doable, but it's not an easy thing to do. What have you got here, and how does it make that a much easier process?
So what we have here is our digital display, 3ETECH display, that actually has a separate connection that we can actually click the 3E display on the fine boring head, as we see here with our variable, and then we would switch on the display, zero it out, and from there we would make our adjustment. But also we can go now to our latest addition to our 3ETECH family, which are our 410 series of tool, which starts from the diameter 20 millimeter, which actually is the smallest boring tool that actually can be adjusted digitally. We click it on again, we zero it out, and then we are making our adjustment. We don't have to look at the dial, and we can adjust it in both ways, plus, minus. We don't have to care about backlash anymore because we are actually measuring the movement of the slide. So backlash doesn't really matter to us anymore, because back then, only dial, you would have to turn a half turn back and then get it to the smaller diameter and still remember on what hash line I need to actually set it to.
And I see there's a bit of an analog here to kind of a manual lathe or a mill, where you would have, before, you'd be reading off the dials on the handles. But every manual lathe and mill now has a DRO, which measures exactly what the axes are doing. This is kind of new technology, and now you can apply it to boring bars. You need to have.
Oh yeah, because, you know, what you see is what you get, and you can set it down to 2 microns without any doubts, or you always can repeat that as well.
So if you're fine finishing critical applications in high value parts, you need to make sure you're doing those bore finishes absolutely right. Check out 3ETECH, made by Wohlhaupter and supplied by Allied Machine.